This is the case of Victoria Anna Elizabeth Cafasso, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short under mysterious circumstances. A story filled with unanswered questions, shocking twists, and a community left searching for closure. In this video, we'll look at the events leading up to her disappearance, and an inquiry that has left more questions than answers. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support helps keep these stories alive and ensures the victims are never forgotten. Now let's begin. The story takes place in the remote and beautiful island of Tasmania, Australia. Victoria was born on June 8, 1975, in Surrey, England, and spent much of her childhood growing up in Italy. Though born in the United Kingdom, she maintained strong ties to both Britain and Italy. Those who knew Victoria described her as intelligent, curious, and eager to experience life beyond familiar boundaries. Her sharp intellect was often attributed to her father, a lawyer who hoped she might one day follow a similar path. Her mother owned a travel business, a background that likely shaped Victoria's deep love for exploration. Travel was a defining part of Victoria's life. She frequently journeyed with her mother and was raised in a comfortable, well-off household. Close to her family and supported in her ambitions, she appeared to have a promising future ahead. Fluent in Italian, English, and French, she was widely regarded as bright and capable. When she told her father that she aspired to become a doctor, he was filled with pride. As she grew older, Victoria enrolled in a law program in Italy, though her desire to see more of the world only intensified. Around the age of 20, she told her family one evening that she planned to travel to England to stay with her grandparents. Her father was unhappy with the decision, but he ultimately could not stop her. Victoria left for England soon after. While in England, she began planning a trip to Australia. A cousin named Venus lived in Tasmania, an island state about 240 kilometers south of the Australian mainland. During this period, Victoria contacted another cousin, Simon Howard, seeking support. She told him she wanted to visit Australia and asked if she could stay with him during her trip. Although they were cousins, they barely knew one another and had only met twice before. Despite this, Simon agreed to host her in Tasmania. With those plans in place, Victoria prepared for the journey, packed her belongings, and traveled to Australia, arriving on October 6, 1995. After the long trip, Simon and one of his friends met her at the airport. Together, they drove to Beaumaris, where Simon was living at the time. Beaumaris was a small coastal community with only a few hundred residents, made up largely of fishers, surfers, and retirees. The house where Victoria stayed was a modest rental, located within this quiet and isolated area. On the drive to David's house, they stopped at Shirley's Lookout, a viewpoint overlooking Beaumaris Beach. It was there that Victoria met three local residents, one of whom was a woman named Hilda Jackson. Hilda later recalled that they connected instantly. From the very beginning, Victoria made her feel at ease and came across as a warm and gentle young woman. Hilda described her as exceptionally kind, soft-spoken, intelligent, and strikingly beautiful. Many people also noted a strong physical resemblance between Victoria and Hilda. At the time, this detail seemed insignificant, but it would later take on a far more unsettling meaning. Beyond this brief connection, Victoria didn't have time to build relationships with many people in Tasmania. Within days of her arrival, she would become the victim of one of the state's most disturbing and perplexing murder cases. She arrived on October 6th, and within a week, she would be gone. On October 9th, Victoria visited Hilda Jackson at her home. The two bonded quickly, spending around half an hour together before Victoria left. They talked about seeing each other again soon. Later that day, Victoria attended a small, private birthday gathering for a woman named Mandy. It was during this visit that she learned the house Simon was staying in actually belonged to Mandy. That evening, Victoria went for a walk around the neighborhood before returning home. The next day, she took another walk, continuing to familiarize herself with the area. Then came October 11th. Victoria woke early that morning at 8:10 a.m. She told Simon she planned to walk down to the beach and asked to borrow his small carry bag. They ate breakfast together and spoke briefly before she left the house at around 9 a.m., reaching the beach close to 10 a.m. Later, witnesses reported seeing Victoria sunbathing approximately 700 meters south of the beach access gate near the Surfside Hotel. Another person who saw Victoria that day was Hilda Jackson, who noticed her walking alone toward the beach. Hilda planned to meet her later, intending to go for a run along the shoreline after finishing work, hoping they would cross paths. At this point, Victoria was last seen alive. Roughly an hour later, Hilda set out for her run, but she chose to start in the opposite direction from where Victoria had been sunbathing. She decided to run against the wind first, making the return trip easier. Hilda later said she thinks about that decision every day, believing that if she had gone the other way, she might have encountered Victoria, possibly prevented what was about to happen. At around 1:30 p.m. that afternoon, a local woman named Margaret was walking her dog along a familiar stretch of beach near Freshwater Creek. Margaret lived nearby and followed this same route almost every day. As she moved along the shoreline, enjoying the quiet and the sea air, something unusual caught her eye near the water's edge. As she drew closer, the scene became horrifyingly clear. A young woman was lying face down in the sand, partially unclothed. While the waves gently pushed her body back and forth, she was completely motionless. The sight was deeply disturbing. Shock and fear set in as Margaret realized what she was seeing. After a brief moment of disbelief, she turned and ran to the nearest house to get help. She reached the home of two men who lived nearby and urgently knocked on their door. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, the men accompanied her back to the beach to confirm what she had seen, ensuring there was no mistake in the small coastal community. Once they saw the body for themselves, police were immediately contacted, triggering an investigation that would soon shock the nation. The victim was quickly identified as Victoria. Her family, including Simon, was notified of the devastating news. From the outset, it was clear that this was not an accident. Victoria had been murdered. Soon after, a large number of police officers and forensic specialists arrived at the scene. As investigators examined the area, several of Victoria's personal belongings were found scattered nearby, including a bracelet, sunglasses, a shoulder bag, sandals, a ring, and a watch. Her body was located at the water's edge, and she was partially unclothed, with her possessions spread across the scene. The post-mortem revealed the sheer brutality of the attack. Victoria had been stabbed 17 times, with 2 of those wounds proving fatal. Additional stab wounds were found on her head, face, arms, and hands, indicating clear defensive injuries. Detectives concluded that she had fought fiercely and desperately against her attacker. During the assault, 3 of her teeth were broken, suggesting she had been struck with a heavy object. Her face was also severely damaged, with the front partially caved in, showing the extreme violence used against her. The attack was prolonged and vicious. Investigators also discovered signs of a struggle approximately 55 meters from where Victoria's body was eventually found. Her bikini bottoms, towel, and t-shirt were missing from the scene and have never been recovered. After this point, the investigation became riddled with serious errors. The crime scene was covered in footprints left in the sand, and investigators believed at least one of them may have belonged to the killer. Despite this, police took only a single cast of one footprint, even though clearer and better preserved prints were visible nearby. The cast that was taken was of poor quality. Later, forensic experts determined that the footprint cast was insufficient for comparison. It lacked the level of detail needed to definitively match it to a suspect's footwear. A properly preserved print could have revealed critical information, such as the type of shoes worn, the individual's walking pattern, and even an approximate shoe size. This evidence could have been used to compare against suspects or witnesses known to have been on the beach that day. Instead, the footprint evidence proved useless, and no additional prints were collected. Further mistakes followed almost immediately. Victoria's body was moved and covered with a blue top to shield it from public view. before a thorough crime scene examination was conducted. This action introduced foreign material into the scene, contaminating and compromising potential evidence. The area was also not secured quickly, allowing local residents to unknowingly walk through parts of the scene and disturb what little evidence remained. Critical photographs and video documentation were never taken, and the state forensic pathologist did not attend the scene, causing delays in the collection and analysis of vital forensic evidence. The investigation and evidence handling were so poorly managed, the police effectively undermined their own chances of identifying the killer. This raised an unavoidable question: who was responsible? Who killed Victoria? Because the murder occurred in broad daylight and shocked the small coastal community, speculation quickly spread. One theory suggested the involvement of the Italian mafia, based on the fact that Victoria's father was a lawyer in Italy who had taken legal action against organized crime figures. However, no evidence ever supported this claim. Another theory focused on a local offender, particularly due to a prior disappearance in the same region. 2 years earlier, on March 12, 1993, a 26-year-old German tourist named Nancy Grunwald vanished while cycling along Tasmania's east coast. Nancy had arrived in Tasmania from New Zealand on March 6th and rented a bicycle on March 9th to explore the island. On the morning of March 12th, Nancy left the St. Helens hostel with plans to travel south along the Tasman Highway. Around 11 a.m., she was seen for the last confirmed time. After that, she disappeared without a trace. To this day, the case remains unresolved, and some continue to speculate that Nancy's disappearance may be connected to Victoria's murder. Following Victoria's death, police quickly questioned Simon and other acquaintances she had met during her brief stay in Tasmania. Each was eventually cleared of suspicion for legitimate reasons. Despite this, fear and tension spread throughout the neighborhood, with residents anxious that they might be wrongly accused or even living near the perpetrator. Victoria's family traveled from Italy to Tasmania and visited the beach where their daughter had been found. Her body was eventually returned to Italy for burial. Not long afterward, they received a poignant letter written by Victoria herself just days before her death. In it, she described how much she was enjoying her time in Australia, a bittersweet reminder of the life taken too soon. The investigation proved incredibly complex. Over 300 people were named as potential suspects. Astonishingly, despite the murder occurring in broad daylight on a relatively busy beach, no one directly witnessed or heard the attack. Police even briefly considered Martin Bryant, who later committed the Port Arthur massacre, as a potential suspect, but he was ultimately ruled out. Authorities and the media eventually narrowed their focus to 4 men who became known as the fishermen: the biker, the doctor, and the surfer, believing one of them could be responsible. Victoria is thought to have been attacked around 11:30 a.m. that morning. The surfer, whose identity has never been confirmed, drew attention after witnesses reported seeing a young man on the beach at roughly the time of the murder. Police suspect he may have been in his 20s, around 6 feet tall, physically fit, and exhibiting the typical appearance of a surfer. Witnesses saw him running along the beach around 11 a.m., and a light-colored Subaru station wagon was spotted nearby, possibly connected to him. After the murder, the suspect reportedly left the area, never to be identified or apprehended. Despite widespread media coverage, neither the man nor the vehicle has ever been traced. The fisherman, identified as Tony Kirkland, was considered a suspect due to suspicious behavior noted in the weeks leading up to Victoria's death. Hilda Jackson had a particularly disturbing encounter on the beach near the dunes. She recalled a man approaching her slowly and asking in a chilling manner for 4 directions off the beach, leaving her deeply unsettled. Shortly afterward, Hilda noticed that her hidden underwear had been taken from the sand while she ran. Later, she discovered that a neighbor's clothesline had been broken into, with several women's garments stolen. Police eventually linked these incidents to Tony Kirkland, a fisherman from a nearby town. Investigators were unsure whether Tony intended to target Hilda specifically or had mistaken Victoria for her. given the striking resemblance between the two women confirmed by witnesses. The identities of the biker and doctor also remained part of the investigation, but the surfer and fisherman stood out as the most likely persons of interest in the eyes of investigators. Despite extensive efforts, no arrests were made, and the case remains unsolved, leaving a haunting mystery over the quiet Tasmanian coast. In 1998, just a few years after Victoria's murder, a 17-year-old girl obtained a protection order against Tony Kirkland, the fisherman, claiming he had been following her and making violent threats. Kirkland's involvement during the investigation remained unusual. A judge later noted that he seemed to enjoy the attention of being a suspect, finding it thrilling. Ultimately, he denied any connection to Victoria's death, and authorities do not believe he was the killer. Another person of interest was Gary Holmes, known locally as the biker. Although he was not affiliated with a criminal biker gang, he rode a motorcycle, earning him the nickname. Police scrutinized his behavior after Victoria's death because witnesses reported him acting strangely on the day her body was discovered. During questioning, some noted a zombie-like demeanor, which raised suspicions of shock or possibly guilt. Holmes also had visible injuries on the day of the crime, including cuts and bruises, which he attributed to punching a door after an altercation with his ex-wife. Despite the odd circumstances, investigators largely ruled him out as a suspect. The final primary person of interest was the doctor, Roman Hassel, a Czech physician living locally at the time. He had only recently moved to Tasmania a few weeks prior to the murder and had a troubling past, including recent jail time for threatening his second wife with a knife and a documented fascination with weapons. Early in the investigation, police noted that Hassel could not provide a solid alibi for the morning of October 11th, though someone claimed he had been sick at home, an assertion that could not be verified. He also had cuts on his face during that period. Initially, Hassel told authorities he had never visited the beach that day. Later, one of his girlfriends reported that he admitted to being there, directly contradicting his earlier statements. One of his ex-wives recalled asking him if he had killed Victoria, to which he allegedly responded, "Maybe I did. I don't remember." Despite these concerning details, no concrete evidence has ever linked him to the crime. His medical career ended in disgrace, and he was deregistered after multiple instances of malpractice. Tasmanian police have stated that he remains a person of interest, along with other individuals, and they are open to receiving any new information. After these leads, the case went cold. Victoria's father passed away not long after her death, and they were buried side by side, the deeply tragic moment for the family. Over the years, police have occasionally reviewed the case, even employing new technology to search for overlooked clues. However, no one has ever been convicted, and the murder remains unsolved. The crime profoundly affected the local community. Hilda Jackson recalled a time when neighbors left their doors unlocked, and trust was abundant. But Victoria's murder introduced a lasting atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Many residents moved away, and some even ended their marriages, unwilling to live in a town where the killer could still be among them. A well-known investigator who later examined the case concluded that even if the killer were identified today, a successful prosecution would be unlikely. Critical evidence was lost or compromised during the early stages, leaving too many reasonable doubts. According to the expert, the only realistic way the killer might ever be caught is through a confession, which seems highly improbable. Victoria's case remains a tragic story, casting a long, somber shadow over Tasmania. Her family continues to live with the grief and uncertainty left by that horrific day, adding to the chilling nature of the crime. The teeth Victoria lost during the attack were never recovered, a haunting reminder that someone may have kept them as a twisted memento, and that the killer's identity may remain forever unknown. Thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell icon on all. There are many more shocking stories ahead.
Brittany Gregory was 16 years old in the summer of 2004, and she carried herself with a seriousness that most teenagers don't find until much later. She was a straight-A student at her school in Brick Township, the kind of kid whose teachers remembered her name long after she left their class. She had a specific dream, not vague, not shifting, but locked in with the kind of certainty that made people believe she'd actually do it. She wanted to study forensic science. She wanted to be the person who found the truth buried in the evidence, who gave answers to families when no one else could. Her mother, Deborah Gregory, described her simply, "She was my prize. She was everything I worked for, everything." July 11th, 2004 was a Sunday, the tail end of a summer weekend, the kind of warm, long evening that makes 45 minutes feel like an eternity when you're 16 and the night still has hours left in it. It was 8:30 p.m. and Brittany was at her father's house on Greenwood Loop Road, a quiet residential street not unlike any other in Brick Township. She wanted to get to her boyfriend's house. She called her mother. Deborah told her to wait, her sister would come in 45 minutes. It wasn't a long time. It wasn't unreasonable. It was 45 minutes. But Brittany was 16 and she had already waited long enough. She decided not to wait. A car slowed in front of the house and stopped. Behind the wheel was Jack Fuller Jr., a 38-year-old man she recognized immediately. He wasn't a stranger lurking at the edges of her life. His daughter, Cassandra, was a close friend of Brittany's sister, Bobby Jo Dunn. Their families moved in the same circles. His face belonged to her world. There was no alarm, no hesitation. There was trust, immediate and uncomplicated, the kind that only exists between people whose lives are genuinely intertwined. She got in the car. It was the last decision she ever made freely. By the morning of Monday, July 12th, the Gregory family knew something was wrong. Sunday night had passed without a word from Brittany. She had never arrived at her boyfriend's house. There were no calls, no messages, no explanation. She was simply gone, swallowed by the space between where she had been and where she was supposed to go. What followed was one of the largest search operations in the history of Ocean County. Hundreds of officers combed through the area. State police helicopters swept low over the neighborhoods, over the wooded stretches beyond the residential streets, over every piece of ground that could be hiding something. Bloodhounds were brought in, working the earth methodically, following a trail that the human eye couldn't see. The community that had recently been ranked among the safest cities in America was suddenly searching for one of its children. Mayor Joseph Scarpelli addressed the town publicly, calling it the worst tragedy Brick Township had ever seen. The ranking, which had once been a point of civic pride, now hung over every press briefing like a bitter joke. But even as the search spread outward, investigators were already looking inward, zeroing in on a single name. Jack Fuller Jr. was the last known person to have been seen with Brittany, and detectives moved toward him quickly. They were helped, in part, by a witness. Thomas Long was a friend of Fuller's who told police he had been in the car that night. He described how the evening unfolded. Fuller had driven him to his destination first, dropping him off and leaving Brittany alone in the car with a man who was, whatever his connection to her family, not her guardian, not her father, not anyone with any right to be responsible for her. Long also offered one quiet, telling detail about Brittany during the drive. She had barely spoken to him. She wasn't engaging with the conversation. She was focused, impatient, fixed on getting to where she was going. She was just a teenager trying to get to her boyfriend's house. She never got there. Investigators needed Fuller to give himself away. They sent someone in with a wire, and the person they turned to was Thomas Long himself. Long, the man who had been in the car that night, who had been dropped off first and left Brittany alone with Fuller, had come to understand what that might mean. He cooperated with police. And what the wire captured was worse than investigators had anticipated, because Fuller wasn't just talking about a grave. He asked Long whether 4 feet of earth was deep enough to keep the animals away. He was calculating, out loud, the depth of a burial. But Fuller was also talking about Long. He was suggesting, in terms that left no room for misinterpretation, that Long needed to be silenced. That Long knew too much. That Long was a problem. The police weren't just building a murder case anymore. They were racing to prevent a second one. And then there was the moment that Deborah Gregory would carry for the rest of her life. Sometime in those days between Brittany's disappearance and Fuller's arrest, while Deborah was still out searching, still knocking on doors, still driving streets, still refusing to stop, Jack Fuller Jr. sat in the back of her car. He was there, physically present, in the vehicle of the mother of the girl he had killed, and he put his arms around her. He hugged her. He told her everything was going to be okay. Deborah later told reporters what she felt in that moment, not comfort, not reassurance, but something cold. A coldness she couldn't explain and couldn't shake. She said that if she had known then what she would come to know, he would never have made it to the courthouse. He was arrested on July 18, 2004. But the charge at that moment was not yet murder. It was kidnapping and related offenses. Prosecutors, led by Executive Assistant Prosecutor Ronald Delaney, were moving on what they had. The wire recording, the DNA from blood found inside Fuller's car, and a witness whose life Fuller had already threatened. The murder charge would follow as the evidence solidified, and 9 days later, it did. Fuller appeared in court wearing a red jumpsuit. He looked straight ahead and showed nothing. Deborah Gregory was in that courtroom, and she had made a decision about how she would face this moment. She wanted to look right in that man's face, she said. She wanted him to see her. She wanted him to understand that she was not going anywhere and that neither was Brittany's memory. On July 27, 2004, 16 days after Brittany disappeared, the Bloodhounds led police to a spot off Ridge Avenue in Lakewood, New Jersey, just miles from where her family had been waiting. Beneath a set of power lines, in a shallow grave under open sky, they found her. She had no clothing. 16 days of a New Jersey summer had taken a severe toll, and the official cause of death was listed as undetermined due to decomposition. But medical examiner Dr. Heidko Park, the Ocean County medical examiner, testified that the evidence pointed toward something more complete and more terrible than a single blow. Signs consistent with both blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. The summer heat had stolen the definitive proof, but what it could not erase told a story of its own. She had wanted to spend her life reading crime scenes. Now she was one. In October 2005, to avoid the death penalty, Jack Fuller Jr. agreed to plead guilty. As part of that agreement, he was required to explain in open court, in front of the family, in front of the record, exactly what had happened on the night of July 11, 2004. What he described was methodical and without remorse. He had driven Brittany to an isolated area and stopped the car. Then he reached for a crack pipe and began to use it. Brittany Gregory, a straight-A student with a strong moral foundation and the ambition to build a career around truth and justice, did not stay silent. She was furious. She tried to slap the pipe out of his hand. Fuller responded by punching her at least twice in the head, hard enough to incapacitate her. Then, with her unconscious body beside him, he finished his crack. He sat there, inches from her, and finished. At some point while he was still using, he heard a sound coming from her, a gurgling. The sound of a person whose airway is filling with blood, struggling to breathe, caught somewhere between life and the absence of it. He heard it, and he waited. He finished what he was doing. When he was done, he checked on her. She was dead. He then moved her body to the trunk of the car. She was 16 years old. She had asked for a ride. She had tried to do the right thing. And the last sound she made in this world was one that the man who killed her chose to ignore until it was convenient for him to turn around. There was one more injustice buried inside the forensics, quieter than the others, but no less infuriating. Because of the 16 days Brittany spent in the July heat before she was found, the decomposition was too advanced for medical examiners to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. The evidence, if it had ever existed, was gone. And because it was gone, Executive Assistant Prosecutor Ronald Delaney could not bring aggravated sexual assault charges against Fuller. The delay in finding her, the very fact that he had buried her and bought himself time, had effectively shielded him from an additional charge. The earth he had used to hide her had also, in a legal sense, partially protected him. That is not justice. That is what decomposition does to accountability. On January 13, 2006, Judge Vincent Grasso sentenced Jack Fuller Jr. to 30 years in New Jersey State Prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that goes beyond even New Jersey's No Early Release Act, which mandates violent offenders serve at least 85% of their time. Fuller received something stricter, no parole consideration at all. He will not be eligible for release until he is well into his late 60s, if he lives that long. Deborah Gregory sat through every moment of it. She had sat through all of it. From the first missing persons call to the search helicopters to the shallow grave to the guilty plea to this final morning in court, she had not looked away once. There is something almost unbearable in the irony of how this case ended. Brittany Gregory had dedicated her young ambitions to forensic science, to the idea that physical evidence, properly examined, could speak for those who no longer could. She wanted to be the one who processed the scene, ran the tests, built the airtight case. And in the end, it was precisely that discipline that built the case against her killer. DNA evidence from blood found inside Jack Fuller's car was among the evidence that prosecutors used to anchor their charges. The field she was running toward reached back and found her. We tell children to be afraid of strangers. We describe danger as something outside the known world, the unfamiliar car, the face you don't recognize, the person who has no connection to your life. But Jack Fuller Jr. was not a stranger. He was a neighbor's father. He was a familiar face from a familiar world. He was the ride that felt safe precisely because he wasn't unknown. He was known. And that knowledge, that misplaced, reasonable 16-year-old trust, is what put Brittany Gregory in that car. The most dangerous person isn't always the one you don't know. Sometimes it is exactly the one you do. Jack Fuller Jr. was sentenced on January 13, 2006. He received 30 years without parole. Brittany Gregory was 16 years old. She wanted to be a forensic scientist. Her family never stopped fighting for her.